So the very first candy that I'm going to be making is 7-layer bars, and this is arguably the easiest of all of the candies, but it is the only one that you do have to bake. So these are called 7-layer bars because there are 7 layers. The bottom layer has to be some sort of cookie, and if you look in the video description, I lay out like all the different substitution options that you can have for some layers of this, but I like using graham crackers. And you want to crush these either in a food processor or in a plastic bag with a rolling pin. So that was 4 graham crackers. Incidentally, I never use a recipe when I make this, and the reason why is it is so stupid easy to remember. And it's pretty forgiving, like you don't need like the exact measurements of everything. If you look at the recipe in the video description, I spell out like what the actual recipe is for like the actual amount. I'm making a quarter recipe here, by the way. So here we have half a stick of butter, or 4 tablespoons, and you just dump it in there. You don't really have to mix it or anything. And this is not one of the layers, but because this is unsalted butter, I'm just gonna add a little salt. Okay, so that was 2 layers. Now for the next layer, layers 3 and 4, you need some kind of melty thing. Some kind of melty chip. And traditionally, I like bittersweet chocolate chips and butterscotch chips. And again, you just kind of layer it in there. I'm not really measuring anything. It was probably like a 1/4 cup. That was a little more butterscotch, but I just wanted to finish up that bag. Layers 5 and 6 need to be some kind of nut thing, and traditionally it's sweetened shredded coconut. So if you're one of those weird people who doesn't like coconut, you can use just regular nuts. If you're allergic to nuts, you can use seeds. If you don't like either of those things, then maybe don't make this recipe. Or, you know, you could probably try it with cereal or something. You just need something like crunchy and textury. And for the nut, you can use any nut. You can use a mixture of nuts. I like pecans. And now on to layer 7. This is the only layer that really you can't compromise on. You kind of have to use sweetened condensed milk. If you're lactose intolerant or vegan, you can make your own sweetened condensed non-dairy milk with a non-dairy milk. I have never done this before and I'm the wrong person to ask, but if you look up like how to make sweetened condensed milk online, you'll find recipes. You can probably even find recipes for how to make non-dairy sweetened condensed milk. So anyway, the whole recipe, this is where we're getting into fractions of cans of things. The whole recipe uses a whole can of sweetened condensed milk, which is perfect because it's annoying having like parts of cans of leftover sweetened condensed milk left over. I'm only doing a 1/4 recipe, so I'm using a 1/4 can. Here I have half a can, and the half that I already used, I used in my flans at Thanksgiving. And so I'm going to use half of the remaining, which is a 1/4 of a can, for this mini recipe of 7-layer bars, and then I'm going to use the remaining 1/4 of a can for another Christmas candy that I'm going to make right after this. So ordinarily, you know, this uses a whole can of sweetened condensed milk, my other Christmas candy uses a whole can of sweetened condensed milk, but if you are single or if you just have a partner and that's it, you don't have a big family, and you want to have a variety of candies without like making a lot of each candy and eating candy until March, it's really nice to just use part of the can for one candy, part of the can for another candy, so that's why I do it this way. Anyway, you want to very carefully, it's not very much really, need to make sure I have a 1/4 can left for my other candy. That is about right. And there, that's it, it's our 7th layer. And then all you have to do is put this in a 350 oven for minutes. And behold, it's golden, nutty, candy goodness. So you need this to cool. Preferably you cool it all the way before you pull it out of the pan and cut it into bars, but I really love eating it warm. So I'm gonna be a little impatient and cut myself a little piece to have with tea in a minute. So I loosened these little exposed corners, and now I can just pull it right out of the pan. It's the convenient thing about using parchment. And this is such a nice, neat little recipe. I'm just gonna cut it into 8 bars. And these are divine when they are fresh out of the oven and still warm. But yeah, if you want them to slice more cleanly than mine are slicing, wait until they're cool. I just couldn't wait because I'm about to have my tea. Anyway, these are absolutely delicious and super, super easy to make, as you can see, and I hope you make them this year. So this is truly a Christmas tradition, these coconut balls. I actually have another video that I uploaded several years ago and then re-uploaded where I made a larger version of the recipe, either a half or a whole recipe. But as I mentioned earlier when I was making these 7-layer bars, the whole purpose for me making all of these candies is to like use up the rest of a can of sweetened condensed milk. So this recipe, this is a quarter recipe now of my coconut balls. So I'm starting with half a stick of melted butter. For this one, unsalted butter actually is preferable. And then a quarter of a can of sweetened condensed milk. Again, if this were a whole recipe, it would be a whole can of sweetened condensed milk. But I prefer making smaller recipes of more different kinds of things, so I get to have like a variety of cookies and candies instead of just like one cookie, one candy. This is another candy that's really easy. Kids can make it. I made this when I was a kid all the time. The only challenging part is covering them in chocolate. But this, the filling is super easy. And as you can see, like not all my butter is perfectly melted. That's okay. Next thing you need is about a quarter of a 12-ounce bag, 14-ounce bag of sweetened flaked coconut. And again, if you're one of those weird people who doesn't like coconut, I don't know what to tell you. Whenever I bring these to like a party or a gathering and people always ask, what's in it? And I'll tell them, and then sometimes when I get to the coconut part, they're like, ah, that's too bad, I don't like coconut. And I'm like, why? Coconut is amazing! Anyway, I understand lots of people don't like coconut. But yeah, if you don't like coconut, just don't make these, really. I mean, they're called coconut balls. Like, you can't exactly substitute the coconut with anything. I mean, I guess you could substitute it with, like, ground nuts, maybe. By that point, you're kind of just making marzipan. Which, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Ooh, I almost forgot. You want to add your extract in before the coconut, technically. I find the more extract, the tastier. I'm doing half a teaspoon of vanilla. I'm calling it extract instead of vanilla because I've made this with different flavors before and it's really tasty. I made them with hazelnut extract last year and they were delicious, but hazelnut extract is very expensive and I don't happen to have any at the moment, so vanilla's fine. I've also made, I made one version last year with rose water and almonds as the nut. Pistachio would have been great, but I couldn't find like untoasted, unsalted pistachios. So you can get a little creative with these, like beyond the coconut, like the nut component and the flavoring component, you can get a little creative. And speaking of nuts, this is 2/3 of a cup of chopped hazelnuts. The original recipe of this uses walnuts, which I like very much. My husband is not the biggest fan of walnuts though, and it's really tasty with hazelnuts. I love hazelnuts also, so I'm using hazelnuts. We live in the Pacific Northwest where you can get like really good hazelnuts for pretty cheap. So this is delicious as it is. You can just eat this with a spoon, and I have done that before. But to turn it into a stiff enough dough to roll into balls for our candy, you have to add powdered sugar. For the whole recipe, you want a 2-pound, whoa, you can't even see it. So for the whole recipe, you want a 2-pound bag of powdered sugar. If you're making it for the first time, it's advisable that you use quantities that are much easier to measure. I'm using a quarter of a 2-pound bag, so half a pound of powdered sugar. I know what the dough is supposed to be like I know what the consistency is supposed to be like, so I can just kind of wing it. But if you're new to this, it's by the pound, not by the cup. So I would suggest that you make either a half or a whole recipe, not a quarter recipe. If this is like your first time making it and you're not really confident about the consistency. Or, you know, if you're confident enough, you can just wing it like I am and just add powdered sugar until it's the right consistency. Confession, I actually have not ever made a batch this small before of this candy. The smallest I've ever gone is half a recipe, because I'd use half the can of condensed milk in this and then the other half of the can in 7-layer bars. But even that, I would find, unless I had a bunch of friends to give a lot of it away to, was just way too much candy for me. And even with a husband now, it's like, it's a lot of candy, especially since I'm also going to make at least one kind of cookie, and this year I'm making a Stollen as well, German fruitcake, so And I'm gonna make a Yule log at actual Christmas. So I'm already making so many sweet things, like I don't want a bunch of these candies. I am technically still on a diet too, so I'm only gonna be eating like 1 piece of candy a day instead of like 5 like I used to. So, you know, that's why I'm making a smaller recipe. So at this point, you're gonna reach a point where it's just gonna be really cumbersome to mix it with a spoon, and you're going to have to get in there with your impeccably clean fingers. So yeah, this is looking, woo, camera jiggle. This is looking about right. It's still sticking to my fingers a little bit, but not like a lot. So we're ready to roll this into balls. Now you just have to roll it into a bunch of little balls, and it'll be tempting to make these balls really big because you will get tired of rolling them after a while, but try to keep them as small as possible. I'd say about this size. And this will take a while, so be patient. They're all rolled. I counted it's between 30 and 40 balls total. So you need to chill these overnight in the fridge before you can coat them in chocolate. Otherwise they're going to melt all over the place while you're coating them and be difficult to handle and make a big mess. So chill them overnight. So I'm starting what is called a double boiler or a bain-marie. It's a pot of just a little bit of water, a couple inches, and I'm going to bring it to a simmer. And then over it, I'm going to put this bowl. You should test your bowl before you put the water in there and put it on the heat just to make sure that it fits properly. You want it to like nestle securely over the pot without like touching the water necessarily. And this will gently heat it and keep it hot, which is important because we're going to put chocolate in here. So this is almost a full 12-ounce bag. It's like a 2/3 of a bag of bittersweet chocolate. I have used milk chocolate before, like in the past when I was a kid, and it was okay, but you really want bittersweet or semi-sweet, even if you're not a dark chocolate person. Yeah, you definitely want a darker chocolate for this because the coconut balls themselves are so sweet. And of course, this is just too tall for my camera. Lovely. You can kind of see that. Now, there's one more important addition that you have to add to the chocolate. And that is a little bit, with this amount for this recipe, you only need about a teaspoon of coconut oil. And no, it doesn't have to be coconut oil, you can use vegetable oil. We used to use, back in the day when I was a kid, we'd use paraffin wax actually. But it's important basically to just add fat, oil to this mixture, because if you don't, it will coat way too thick on the candies. And you might think that's a good thing, but it's not. It's like really hard to chomp through the chocolate, and you want a thinner coat of chocolate. So just a little bit of coconut oil or any oil will thin that out a bit. So we're just gonna wait and let this very, very gently and slowly melt, stirring occasionally. There goes the camera lens. It's not a proper episode of my show without the camera lens fogging up. As you can see, it's almost melted. Oh my god, I keep my tea kettle on the stove while I cook like a normal person. How dare I? You want it to be nice and melted before you dip the candies in. I've turned the heat way down, as low as it can possibly go at this point. It's useful to do this on the double boiler instead of in the microwave because it stays hot while you're dipping all the candies. You don't want it to cool off at all while you're dipping candies. Oh, that's so pretty. Look at that. Bleh. So I have ready here to go a cookie sheet with a piece of parchment weighed down with 2 butter knives, otherwise it'll curl up on itself, and a fork. Fork is the best tool for dipping the candies. Okay, because unfortunately my tripod's not really tall enough for this. I'm gonna have to hold it with one hand while I dip with the other. So, you plop it in, give it a toss. You don't want to leave it in here too long because then the candy itself will start to melt. Get as much excess off as you can, and plunk! I'll show you one more and then I'll do the rest off camera because it's hard doing this with one hand. If you drop the candy back in, which will inevitably happen at least once, just scoop it up and keep going. It's fine. So just as it is inevitable that you drop candies back into the mix before you pull them out, it's also inevitable that I run out of chocolate at some point and have to add more back to the double boiler. So no biggie, if you find yourself running low on chocolate, just add more. You do not want there to be like, there was technically enough like dregs at the bottom of the bowl for I think I just have like 10 candies left to cover. There was technically enough chocolate to cover all of them, but it just wouldn't have looked pretty. It would have been all wrinkly and there would have been some exposed spots. And it's okay that there will be about 3 ounces of chocolate left over at the end. You'll see why in a minute. It's so much better that you have chocolate left over in the bowl than that you like don't have enough. So I'm just gonna add a little more coconut oil and we'll cover the rest. Also, just a note, if you are too scared or intimidated to use the double boiler, you can totally heat the chocolate in the microwave. Just heat it on low and be very, very patient. And then whenever your chocolate gets a little too firm, just stick it back in the microwave again for a little bit and stir it before coating the rest of your candy. I used to do that method all the time when I was a kid. Once you get the hang of a double boiler, it's so much better and easier than the microwave. And behold their coconutty, chocolatey, nutty goodness. Seriously, these are a family favorite. They are wonderful, and they are the most difficult of all the candies to make. But aside from the dipping, which, you know, it's a journey. You get better at it with each year. They're a pretty easy candy otherwise. So now, what are we gonna do with the rest of this chocolate? We're gonna make another candy, of course. Okay, so now I'm gonna make what is probably the easiest candy, and ironically what is usually the best received candy. Not gonna lie, it's kind of vexing, like working really hard on these coconut candies, and so much more skill and time is required for those. But this Rocky Road candy is so stupid easy. You make it in a microwave, no baking required, no other cooking required. You just stir things. So yeah, but it's delicious, which is why it's so well received. So in this bowl, I have about what is left of 3 ounces of dark chocolate. This was left over from when I was covering the coconut candies. This is why I love making this candy after I make that candy, because inevitably you're gonna wind up with a bowl with a lot of leftover melted chocolate stuck to the bottom of it, and this is a great way to use up the rest of that chocolate. So I've got that was about like a heaping third to a small half cup of butterscotch chips. Again, I'm making a super reduced recipe, so if you want like the full recipe, look at the video description. Just kidding. I almost reduced this to like 1/8 of a recipe. Okay, so we're actually gonna do like 2/3 of a not 2/3 of a recipe. I didn't sleep well last night. 2/3 of a cup of butterscotch chips. You can of course use chocolate chips, but I happen to have these chocolate bars that are getting kind of old, so I'm gonna use that. And then 1/4 cup of peanut butter. I pretty much never ever measure peanut butter, I just eyeball it. This is chunky peanut butter too, so I think I'm going to use a little more than 1/4 cup. Because you can also add chopped peanuts to this. So I'm just going to take this and microwave it on low until the chips melt. I don't know if you have ever burned chocolate chips or butterscotch chips in the microwave, but I sure have, and it is one of the saddest things ever. So it's always best to err on the side of caution. Take it out before everything is melted and stir it, because you don't want this to be piping hot anyway. We're going to add another ingredient, the ingredient that actually makes it like Rocky Road. And you don't want this mixture to be like really scalding hot when you add that ingredient, which is marshmallows. You could probably tell from the thumbnail. Anyway, you can also add chopped peanuts to this, which is kind of why I use chunky peanut butter. I was right, I did not have to put it back in the microwave. These little lumps in here, they're either chunks of peanut from the peanut butter or they're like slightly not quite melted butterscotch chips, but either way is fine. It's actually okay with this candy if there's teeny tiny bits of not completely melted chocolate or butterscotch chip, because it's called Rocky Road candy and the chunks are actually kind of nice in there. Alright, now the last. For this reduced recipe, I need 5 ounces of mini marshmallows, which is about 1/3 of this bag. And again, I kind of eyeball it too. You want to make sure they're all coated, but that there's not too many marshmallows. I don't know, I guess this is also kind of to taste. You could, in theory, leave the marshmallows out altogether, and then it's just like a peanut butter chocolate butterscotch fudge, really. But I really like it with the Rocky Roads. And in the full recipe, you'd use like a 9x13 pan. This is a quarter recipe, so I'm using just a loaf pan, and you want to line it with foil so that it's easy to take the candy out later and cut it. And yeah, you just scrape it in here. And this is the cool thing about using this bowl of leftover melted chocolate to make this candy is you can really get in there with a spatula and scrape it clean so that you don't waste any of your melted chocolate. Ooh, I licked some of it off the spoon just then and it was delicious. It's like, I hate to admit it, but this candy is really amazingly good, even though it's so super easy to make. And again, I feel kind of vexed when everyone reaches for seconds or thirds on this candy, the really super easy one that requires absolutely no skill or finesse. Or time. It comes together so quickly, and that's all there is to it. I'll just cover that with plastic and chill it until it's completely cold, and then we'll cut it into bars. Alright, it has chilled for about 3 hours or so. Should be ready to cut. See how clean that is? I don't even have to wash it. You can see it's a nice big old block of candy, and you can chop it up however you see fit. So, 2/12, I guess. And behold, it's peanut buttery marshmallowy goodness. Anyway, super easy candy to make. Kids can totally make this. Adults can make it too. And no matter how hard you work on any other more fancy candy, this is guaranteed to be a big hit.